The laboratory was quiet, except for the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of glassware. James Wright sat at his workbench, staring at a lump of strange material resting in a shallow metal tray. He had spent months on this project, testing, mixing, and retesting formulas. His goal was simple in concept but challenging in practice: to create a super durable bouncy ball that could outperform anything on the market. The company he worked for specialized in plastics and polymers. They wanted a product that could appeal to both children and sports enthusiasts. A ball that could take a beating, bounce higher, and last longer than any rubber ball. Wright believed he was close to a breakthrough. He had been experimenting with an unusual combination of boric acid and silicone oil, hoping the mixture would produce a flexible yet sturdy polymer. At first, the results seemed promising. The substance formed into a soft, rubbery mass, which was exactly what he wanted. But as he began testing it more thoroughly, the problems became obvious. When he tried to roll it into a perfect sphere, it refused to hold its shape for long. It sagged slowly, like dough left out on a warm counter. When he dropped it from a height, it bounced, yes, but not in any predictable way. Sometimes it shot off to the side, other times it barely rebounded at all. It also had an odd stickiness that caused it to pick up dust, crumbs, and anything else it touched. For a toy meant to be fun and clean, this was a serious flaw. Still, Wright wasn't ready to give up. He altered the ratio of ingredients, sometimes increasing the boric acid, sometimes the silicone oil, trying to fine-tune the elasticity and texture. Each variation produced subtle changes, but none solved the fundamental issues. The material was simply too unpredictable to be molded into a consistent, marketable product. The company's product testing department gave it a trial run with children in a local playgroup. The feedback was swift and brutal. The kids were puzzled by it. Some stretched it, others tried to bounce it, but most lost interest quickly. One child even tried to chew on it, grimacing at the odd chemical taste. Parents weren't impressed either. They complained about the mess it made and how easily it stuck to fabrics. When the results came back to the company's executives, the verdict was clear. This product would not be going into production. They saw no way to market it effectively as a toy. Wright's super bouncy dream had collapsed. The polymer, which he had jokingly nicknamed Nonsense, was labeled a failed experiment. In the world of corporate research, failure often means the end of the road. With no commercial application in sight, the company ordered Wright to stop work on the material. The remaining samples were placed in storage, and the formula was archived in the company's files, where it was expected to gather dust and be forgotten. For Wright, it was more than just a professional disappointment. He had invested not only his technical skills, but also his creative energy into this project. Every failed test felt personal, as if the stubborn lump of polymer were mocking his efforts. He knew that innovation often required taking risks and accepting setbacks, but this one stung. It wasn't just that the product failed. It failed in such a peculiar way, defying even the basic expectations of how a bouncing ball should behave. In the days following the cancellation, Wright cleared his workbench and moved on to other projects. But every so often, he found himself glancing toward the cabinet where a small jar of nonsense sat. There was something strangely captivating about it. Even though it hadn't worked as intended, it had unusual properties. It could be pulled into thin strands without breaking, yet if yanked suddenly, it snapped cleanly. It could be rolled into a ball, but instead of bouncing straight, it ricocheted unpredictably, and if pressed flat, it would slowly ooze outward like thick syrup. Still, in 1970, there was no obvious use for such a material. The world of polymers was full of strange and interesting substances, but not every one of them found a place in the market. Nonsense was simply one more curiosity, something that had promised much, delivered little, and been quietly set aside. What neither Wright nor his employers realized at the time was that this so-called failure was not the end of the story. The material's unusual blend of properties would, years later, be rediscovered and repurposed in ways they could never have imagined. But in that moment, in that quiet laboratory, it was nothing more than a rejected prototype, a toy that wouldn't play, and an invention without a future. The story might have ended there, buried in the archives of a plastics company, if not for the chance encounter that would come years later. But for now, nonsense remained an unused oddity, waiting in the shadows for the right pair of eyes to see what James Wright could not. Years passed. Invention after invention appeared on the market, each claiming to be the next big thing, and James Wright's nonsense faded further into obscurity. The jars containing the strange polymer gathered dust in the company's storage, buried among other forgotten experiments. But fate has a way of bringing old ideas back to life. In the mid-1970s, a bustling invention fair opened its doors in a city known for innovation and entrepreneurship. The event attracted inventors, engineers, and dreamers from all walks of life, each eager to showcase their creations or discover something new. Amid the rows of displays filled with gadgets, tools, and curious devices, a small, unremarkable booth caught the eye of a man named Peter Hodgson. Hodgson was no stranger to odd ideas. He had a keen instinct for spotting potential in places others overlooked. As he strolled past the booth, his attention was drawn to a small table where a company representative had laid out several samples of unusual materials, prototypes, rejects, and experimental compounds that had never reached the shelves. Among them sat a lump of pale, rubbery substance resting on a square of wax paper. When Hodgson picked it up, he noticed the texture immediately. It was cool to the touch, pliable, and strangely satisfying to squeeze. It stretched into long, thin ropes if pulled gently, but snapped with a sharp break when tugged quickly. Curious, he rolled it into a ball and bounced it on the table. The rebound was odd, high one time, sideways the next. Most people would have seen it as little more than a novelty, something to toy with for a few seconds before moving on. But Hodgson felt a spark of possibility. He had spent years observing how small, seemingly insignificant objects could find surprising markets when presented in the right way. The company representative explained that this material had been created years earlier for a bouncing ball project, but was abandoned because it didn't work as intended. No one had found a practical use for it. It had no brand, no market, and no future. Hodgson wasn't convinced. He knew that not every invention needed to succeed in its original purpose to have value. Sometimes, the magic came from finding a completely different application. And as he continued to knead the strange lump in his hands, an idea began to form. At the time, Hodgson had been working with rehabilitation centers, supplying them with tools to help patients regain muscle strength after injuries or surgeries. Many patients needed ways to exercise their hands and fingers to rebuild dexterity. Traditional therapy putty was serviceable but lacked the engaging, almost playful quality of this material. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became. This could be more than a failed toy. It could be a therapeutic tool. Its resistance was perfect for hand-strengthening exercises, and its malleability made it enjoyable to manipulate. Even its unpredictable bounce could be turned into a simple coordination exercise. Within weeks, Hodgson had negotiated to acquire rights to use and distribute the material. He rebranded it with a simple but memorable name: Slime. Though the name would later evolve, his goal at this stage was clear: introduce it not as a toy, but as a medical aid. He began producing small batches, packaging them in plain containers and selling them directly to hospitals and physical therapy clinics. The response was encouraging. Therapists appreciated its versatility, and patients found it more engaging than the stiff, odorless putties they had used before. Some even reported looking forward to therapy sessions simply because of the satisfying feel of the material. While sales were modest, Hodgson sensed he had tapped into something with potential. He knew the real challenge would be taking it beyond the niche world of rehabilitation and into the hands of the general public. For now, however, he focused on refining his supply chain, ensuring a steady production process, and gathering testimonials from medical professionals. Still, in the back of his mind, Hodgson wondered, if people enjoyed working with it in therapy, might they also enjoy it purely for fun? Could this once-forgotten polymer find a second life as an object of play, its original intended purpose, but with a far more successful outcome? Those questions would lead him to take a risk that would change everything. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 3 in the same style, so the momentum and tone stay consistent. That's where the real commercial breakthrough happens. Do you want me to move forward with that next? Peter Hodgson had seen enough to know he was on to something. The strange, elastic substance he had first encountered at the Invention Fair was already making waves in rehabilitation clinics. Patients liked it. Therapists liked it. But the real spark in his mind was not medical. It was playful. Every time Hodgson demonstrated the material at a hospital, there was a moment when people stopped treating it as a therapy aid and started treating it as entertainment. They stretched it into long ropes and twisted them into shapes. They rolled it into a ball and tried to bounce it off the floor. They pressed it flat against a table and watched it slowly ooze downward like a living puddle. It was during one of these moments that Hodgson realized the obvious. He wasn't just holding a tool for recovery. He was holding a toy. There was one problem, though. The original formula was just a bit too sticky. It clung to small bits of lint and dirt, and it could leave a faint residue behind on certain surfaces. While this wasn't much of an issue in a therapy setting, it would be a deal-breaker for a mass-market children's product. Hodgson began working with chemists to adjust the mixture. After several rounds of testing, they discovered that adding sodium borate refined the texture to near perfection. The improved version kept all the elasticity and fun of the original, but with less mess and more durability. It was smooth, clean to handle, and easy to package. Now he needed a name that would stick, one that captured its playful spirit and made people curious enough to pick it up. After brainstorming, he settled on Silly Putty. The name was lighthearted, fun, and easy to remember. Hodgson decided to test the product with the public. He began by producing small batches and packaging them in colorful plastic eggs. The unusual container immediately caught people's attention. Parents liked the neat, portable shape. Kids loved the surprise of opening the egg and finding the strange, stretchy substance inside. He brought his new product to local toy stores, offering demonstrations right in the aisles. Children would gather around as he pulled, twisted, bounced, and even used the putty to lift printed images from comic strips, a trick that fascinated everyone. By pressing the putty onto a newspaper or comic, the ink transferred, creating a mirror image print that could be stretched and distorted for fun. The response was electric. Kids begged their parents for the colorful eggs. Shop owners placed larger orders after seeing them sell out within days. Word spread quickly, and soon Hodgson was getting calls from retailers outside his region, eager to stock the strange new toy. Sales exploded. Silly Putty became a hit not just because of its novelty, but because it offered endless possibilities. There were no instructions, no batteries, no single way to play. Children could shape it into animals, bounce it across the room, or simply knead it for the satisfying feel. It encouraged imagination in a way few toys did. Hodgson capitalized on the growing craze by launching a national advertising campaign. The commercials were simple but effective. Short clips showing people stretching, bouncing, and laughing as they played with Silly Putty. The product's charm spoke for itself. By the end of its first year as a toy, Silly Putty had sold millions of units. It was no longer the forgotten nonsense that had gathered dust in a lab. It was a cultural phenomenon. But beyond the commercial success, something deeper was happening. People of all ages were discovering that Silly Putty wasn't just fun, it was fascinating. Its strange combination of properties made it unlike any other toy. It could be both liquid and solid, depending on how you handled it. It could stretch slowly like taffy or break like porcelain if pulled sharply. It was playful, but it was also mysterious. Unknowingly, Hodgson had opened the door to more than just a toy craze. Scientists and engineers were beginning to take notice, intrigued by the substance's unique behavior. The next chapter of Silly Putty's journey would not be written in toy stores, but in laboratories, where its potential would grow far beyond the world of play. By the early 1980s, Silly Putty was a household name. It had leapt from toy store shelves into Easter baskets, birthday party gift bags, and school playgrounds. Children loved it, parents tolerated it, and retailers couldn't keep it in stock. But while most people saw it as nothing more than a quirky, fun distraction, a small but curious group saw something else. Scientists, particularly those in the field of materials research, began to take notice of Silly Putty's strange and contradictory nature. It didn't behave like a normal solid, but it wasn't exactly a liquid either. If left alone on a table, it would slowly flatten out, flowing like syrup. Yet if rolled into a ball and bounced, it could spring high into the air. Pull it gently, and it stretched into thin threads. Yank it suddenly, and it snapped like dry clay. This behavior fascinated researchers. They began to study its composition and discovered that Silly Putty was an example of what is known as a non-Newtonian fluid. Unlike water or oil, whose viscosity stays constant, non-Newtonian fluids change their viscosity depending on the force applied. Push them slowly, and they move easily. Hit them hard, and they resist, sometimes acting like a solid. At the time, non-Newtonian fluids were still a relatively niche area of study, and Silly Putty offered an accessible, tangible example of the phenomenon. Professors began using it in classrooms to demonstrate principles of material science. Students could see and feel these unique properties in action, making the lesson more memorable than any textbook explanation. The curiosity didn't stop there. Engineers wondered if the same principles that made Silly Putty so fun could also make it useful. Its ability to deform under pressure, absorb energy, and return to its original state made it an interesting candidate for stress testing. If it could handle repeated manipulation without wearing out, perhaps it could be applied to industries that needed flexible, durable materials. Researchers experimented with blending Silly Putty-like compounds into other substances to create new composites. They explored its potential for shock absorption, sound dampening, and even vibration control. Its unpredictable bounce wasn't just a novelty. It hinted at unique ways energy could be stored and released. Medical researchers also took an interest. The same properties that made Silly Putty useful in physical therapy exercises could be refined for more specialized rehabilitation tools. Scientists began developing variants with different resistances and textures, tailoring them to patients with specific needs. Silly Putty's transition from toy to scientific tool marked a turning point. It wasn't just about entertainment anymore, it was about possibility. By examining this humble product under a microscope, scientists were uncovering insights into polymer chemistry, viscoelasticity, and materials engineering. What was once dismissed as nonsense in a corporate lab had now become a case study in innovation, proof that even the most unlikely creations can inspire entirely new fields of thought. And this was only the beginning. The same unique characteristics that made Silly Putty a hit in classrooms and laboratories would soon catch the attention of industries far beyond toys and education. From construction to safety gear, the possibilities for this strange, stretchy substance were about to expand in ways no one could have predicted. Peter Hodgson had seen enough to know he was on to something. The strange, elastic substance he had first encountered at the Invention Fair was already making waves in rehabilitation clinics. Patients liked it. Therapists liked it. But the real spark in his mind was not medical. It was playful. Every time Hodgson demonstrated the material at a hospital, there was a moment when people stopped treating it as a therapy aid and started treating it as entertainment. They stretched it into long ropes and twisted them into shapes. They rolled it into a ball and tried to bounce it off the floor. They pressed it flat against a table and watched it slowly ooze downward like a living puddle. It was during one of these moments that Hodgson realized the obvious. He wasn't just holding a tool for recovery. He was holding a toy. There was one problem, though. The original formula was just a bit too sticky. It clung to small bits of lint and dirt, and it could leave a faint residue behind on certain surfaces. While this wasn't much of an issue in a therapy setting, it would be a deal-breaker for a mass-market children's product. Hodgson began working with chemists to adjust the mixture. After several rounds of testing, they discovered that adding sodium borate refined the texture to near perfection. The improved version kept all the elasticity and fun of the original, but with less mess and more durability. It was smooth, clean to handle, and easy to package. Now he needed a name that would stick, one that captured its playful spirit and made people curious enough to pick it up. After brainstorming, he settled on Silly Putty. The name was lighthearted, fun, and easy to remember. Hodgson decided to test the product with the public. He began by producing small batches and packaging them in colorful plastic eggs. The unusual container immediately caught people's attention. Parents liked the neat, portable shape. Kids loved the surprise of opening the egg and finding the strange, stretchy substance inside. He brought his new product to local toy stores, offering demonstrations right in the aisles. Children would gather around as he pulled, twisted, bounced, and even used the putty to lift printed images from comic strips, a trick that fascinated everyone. By pressing the putty onto a newspaper or comic, the ink transferred, creating a mirror image print that could be stretched and distorted for fun. The response was electric. Kids begged their parents for the colorful eggs. Shop owners placed larger orders after seeing them sell out within days. Word spread quickly, and soon Hodgson was getting calls from retailers outside his region, eager to stock the strange new toy. Sales exploded. Silly Putty became a hit not just because of its novelty, but because it offered endless possibilities. There were no instructions, no batteries, no single way to play. Children could shape it into animals, bounce it across the room, or simply knead it for the satisfying feel. It encouraged imagination in a way few toys did. Hodgson capitalized on the growing craze by launching a national advertising campaign. The commercials were simple but effective. Short clips showing people stretching, bouncing, and laughing as they played with Silly Putty. The product's charm spoke for itself. By the end of its first year as a toy, Silly Putty had sold millions of units. It was no longer the forgotten nonsense that had gathered dust in a lab. It was a cultural phenomenon. But beyond the commercial success, something deeper was happening. People of all ages were discovering that Silly Putty wasn't just fun, it was fascinating. Its strange combination of properties made it unlike any other toy. It could be both liquid and solid, depending on how you handled it. It could stretch slowly like taffy or break like porcelain if pulled sharply. It was playful, but it was also mysterious. Unknowingly, Hodgson had opened the door to more than just a toy craze. Scientists and engineers were beginning to take notice, intrigued by the substance's unique behavior. The next chapter of Silly Putty's journey would not be written in toy stores, but in laboratories, where its potential would grow far beyond the world of play. The journey from children's toy to scientific curiosity had opened unexpected doors for Silly Putty. No longer confined to toy boxes and classroom demonstrations, it was now attracting the attention of engineers in manufacturing and construction. They weren't interested in its novelty. They were interested in its potential to solve real-world problems. One of Silly Putty's most valuable traits was its combination of elasticity and resilience. It could stretch, compress, and twist without losing its structure, yet it would also conform perfectly to the shape of whatever it touched. For construction specialists, this was intriguing. Many building materials were strong but rigid, unable to adapt to irregular shapes. Silly Putty-like compounds, however, could fill every tiny gap, creating seals that were airtight, watertight, and resistant to temperature changes. Industrial chemists began working on modified versions of the Silly Putty formula, adjusting its heat resistance and durability. Soon, it was being used as a component in sealants and caulking for windows, doors, and ventilation systems. Unlike traditional sealants, it didn't shrink or crack over time. It maintained its flexibility, allowing it to expand and contract with temperature changes, an invaluable trait for buildings in regions with extreme weather. Its resistance to moisture and heat also made it useful in protecting electrical systems. Engineers discovered they could mold the substance around wiring and connectors to create insulation barriers that resisted both water damage and heat buildup. In some cases, it even outperformed traditional insulating materials, offering both protection and adaptability. Automotive manufacturers took note as well. The material's ability to absorb vibration made it ideal for reducing rattles and noise in vehicles. Placed strategically in joints and panels, it could dampen sound and absorb minor shocks, improving the driving experience without adding significant weight. But one of the most unexpected uses came in precision machinery. In high-tech manufacturing, even tiny amounts of vibration can cause defects in delicate processes. Silly Putty-inspired compounds were used as vibration dampeners, absorbing mechanical energy and protecting sensitive equipment from disruptions. The versatility of the material also made it a favorite among repair specialists. Its malleability meant it could be pressed into hard-to-reach spots to create temporary seals or to hold small components in place during repairs. Mechanics, plumbers, and even hobbyists began keeping small amounts on hand as a quick, adaptable fix for unexpected problems. What had once been sold in plastic eggs for children, as entertainment, was now quietly becoming part of the infrastructure that kept homes, vehicles, and machines running smoothly. It was never advertised as Silly Putty in these contexts. Often it was a modified industrial-grade polymer, but its origins could be traced back to the same material James Wright had once considered a failure. In boardrooms and design labs, engineers spoke of its practicality, not its playfulness. They valued its ability to solve problems that rigid materials couldn't. The same stretchiness that had once frustrated Wright-EWS attempts to make a bouncing ball was now the very reason it worked so well in sealing, insulating, and absorbing mechanical stress. This was a quiet kind of success, one without flashy commercials or toy store displays, but it was arguably more important. Silly Putty had proven itself not just as a novelty or a science demo, but as a working component in industries where reliability mattered. And soon, those same qualities would be put to the test in a far more critical arena, protecting human lives. By the early 1990s, Silly Putty had already proven itself on Earth. It had evolved from a quirky children's toy into an industrial workhorse, sealing, protecting, and even saving lives. But its next leap would be unlike anything before. The journey began when NASA engineers, always on the hunt for versatile and reliable materials, took notice of its unusual properties. Space travel presents challenges that no earthly environment can match: extreme temperature shifts, zero gravity, and the constant threat of mechanical failure. Every tool and material aboard a spacecraft must be multifunctional, lightweight, and able to withstand stress. Silly Putty, or rather its specially engineered cousins, fit the profile surprisingly well. One of the first challenges it addressed was in the realm of small repairs. In space, even a minor loose component or broken connection can jeopardize a mission. The material's ability to stick without permanent adhesion made it ideal for temporarily holding tools, wires, or small parts in place during delicate repairs. Astronauts could press a lump of the polymer against a component, and it would grip securely without damaging surfaces. Its dust and debris control capabilities were another advantage. Spacecraft accumulate fine particles from machinery, clothing fibers, and other sources. In zero gravity, these particles float freely, posing risks to both equipment and crew health. Silly putty-like materials were used to trap and remove these particles, pressing the polymer onto surfaces to lift contaminants before they could drift into sensitive equipment. The material also proved useful in vibration damping. Spacecraft experience constant micro-vibrations from equipment and sudden jolts from docking maneuvers. Over time, these vibrations can affect precision instruments. Modified silly putty compounds could absorb these tiny shocks, protecting fragile electronics from cumulative damage. Then there was its thermal stability. While not suited for exposure to open space, certain versions of the polymer could endure the temperature fluctuations inside spacecraft, remaining flexible and usable whether conditions were cool or warm. This adaptability meant it could be stored for months and still perform flawlessly when needed. Perhaps its most surprising role was psychological. Space missions can be stressful, and astronauts live in confined environments for weeks or months. Silly Putty's original identity as a tactile, moldable material came into play here, literally. Crew members found that kneading and stretching it could help relieve tension, offering a quiet, low-tech way to reduce stress in high-pressure situations. Its journey to space wasn't widely publicized at the time. NASA isn't known for advertising the playful origins of its technical materials. But among engineers and astronauts, its presence was both practical and quietly charming. A substance once sold in pink plastic eggs was now floating in orbit, serving as both a tool and a comfort. This unlikely leap from toy to space tech cemented Silly Putty's place in the history of innovation. It was a reminder that usefulness doesn't always come from high-tech beginnings. Sometimes a humble, even comical invention can adapt and survive in the most demanding environments imaginable. But even as Silly Putty was proving itself among the stars, it was also continuing its quiet work back on Earth, sealing homes, protecting workers, and cushioning impacts. Its versatility ensured that it was never confined to a single category. And while its spacefaring chapter might seem like the ultimate achievement, the story wasn't over. In the decades to follow, new technologies and creative minds would continue finding ways to use and reinvent this strange, stretchy substance. While Silly Putty was venturing into space and safeguarding lives in protective gear, its potential in the field of medicine was quietly growing. Engineers and scientists had already explored its use in rehabilitation, but what emerged next was far more sophisticated. Surgeons, medical device developers, and researchers began to see the polymer not merely as a playful material or a therapy tool, but as a substance that could transform patient care and surgical precision. The first applications were surprisingly practical. Surgeons discovered that the material could be molded into precise replicas of organs, bones, or tissues. By creating accurate three-dimensional models, doctors could plan complex surgeries with unprecedented accuracy. A heart, a kidney, or even a small section of the skull could be reproduced in polymer form, allowing surgeons to rehearse procedures before performing them on a patient. This hands-on preparation reduced errors, shortened operation times, and increased patient safety. Medical schools embraced the innovation, integrating Silly Putty-based models into teaching curriculums. Students could practice suturing on flexible, realistic replicas, gaining tactile experience that textbooks and diagrams could never provide. In these classrooms, the same material that once delighted children now educated future generations of doctors, bridging the gap between play and life-saving skill development. Beyond teaching, the polymer's flexibility made it ideal for creating temporary medical implants and prosthetics. Surgeons could form custom-fitted devices quickly, using the material to support healing or maintain structural integrity while permanent solutions were developed. Its non-toxic, moldable nature allowed it to interact safely with human tissue in controlled applications, expanding its use in experimental medical treatments. Another breakthrough came in patient rehabilitation. Physical and occupational therapists had already used the material to help patients regain strength and dexterity in their hands. But the next generation of Silly Putty-like compounds was engineered with variable resistance, allowing therapists to tailor exercises for each individual. Children recovering from injuries, adults regaining hand mobility after strokes, and seniors maintaining joint flexibility all benefited from its adaptable properties. Interestingly, the tactile quality of the material also proved beneficial for mental health. Patients reported that the act of kneading, stretching, and manipulating the polymer reduced stress and anxiety, creating a calming sensory experience. Therapists observed increased patient engagement, particularly among children who might otherwise resist repetitive exercises. Research continued to uncover new possibilities. Scientists experimented with using the polymer as a medium for testing surgical instruments, simulating tissue responses in ways that provided accurate, repeatable feedback. In some cases, it even became a base for developing specialized geles that could deliver medication in targeted ways, opening doors for precision treatment in delicate procedures. Through all of these applications, one remarkable fact remained. The same properties that made Silly Putty a playful, stretchy toy, its elasticity, resilience, and responsiveness, were the very qualities that made it invaluable in medicine. What had started as a discarded experiment in a plastics lab decades earlier had evolved into a tool that could heal, educate, and even save lives. This phase of Silly Putty's journey illustrates an essential truth about innovation. Sometimes, the most unlikely materials can have profound impacts far beyond their intended purpose. A product initially dismissed as a failure can, under the right conditions, become indispensable to science, medicine, and human well-being. And as Silly Putty continued to influence medicine, it was also leaving its mark on everyday life. Engineers, designers, and inventors began discovering new ways to incorporate its unique properties into objects people interact with every day, from consumer electronics to household items. Its influence was subtle but pervasive, touching the world in ways most people would never realize. By this point, it was clear. Silly Putty was no longer just a toy, no longer just a classroom experiment, and no longer just a therapy tool. It had become a material of discovery, bridging gaps between play, science, and life-saving innovation. By the turn of the 21st century, the reach of Silly Putty extended far beyond toys, laboratories, and medical facilities. Its influence had quietly woven itself into the fabric of modern life, appearing in ways that most people never realized. From everyday consumer products to advanced technology, the properties of this once-dismissed material were shaping the way we live, work, and interact with the world. In the world of footwear, for example, Silly Putty-inspired polymers found a surprising role. Engineers and designers developed soles that could adapt to the shape of the wearer's foot, offering enhanced comfort and support. These materials absorbed shocks more effectively than traditional rubber, reducing stress on joints and providing a more personalized fit. What began as a novelty toy had now contributed to the development of ergonomically designed footwear that improved people's daily lives in subtle but meaningful ways. In manufacturing and technology, its influence was equally profound. Flexible 3D printing filaments, used to create objects ranging from household gadgets to medical models, were often derived from principles discovered through studying Silly Putty. The ability to stretch, bend, and return to shape without breaking allowed designers to experiment with forms that rigid materials could never achieve. This opened up a new realm of creativity and functional design, enabling products that were previously impossible to make. Even in electronics, Silly Putty-like materials became indispensable. Their unique elasticity and resilience made them ideal for protecting sensitive components in devices such as smartphones, cameras, and wearable technology. They could absorb shocks, dampen vibrations, and maintain integrity over long periods, ensuring that delicate electronics survived daily wear and tear. Artists and creators also embraced the material. Sculptors experimented with its properties to produce temporary models, allowing them to explore shapes and forms in ways traditional clay or resin couldn't. Animators and special effects teams used it for flexible molds and practical effects, appreciating how it could mimic organic movement and respond realistically to touch. The educational impact of Silly Putty continued to grow as well. Science educators used it to demonstrate the behavior of polymers, elasticity, and non-Newtonian fluids. Students could see firsthand how a single material could simultaneously exhibit solid and liquid properties. Its playful nature made learning interactive, tactile, and memorable. It was a rare example of a material that could engage the mind while entertaining the senses. Even in space exploration, Silly Putty's legacy persisted. While the original material had already been used to stabilize instruments and repair equipment in zero gravity, derivatives of it continued to serve in spacecraft, helping to cushion components and absorb vibrations during launches and landings. Its ability to perform reliably under extreme conditions meant that the material SS reach was literally out of this world. The most remarkable aspect of Silly Putty's influence, however, was its quiet ubiquity. Few people realized that the polymer they had stretched, bounced, and molded in childhood had contributed to innovations spanning industries, applications, and continents. What had once been a failed toy became a versatile tool, a substance that bridged entertainment, science, industry, and everyday life. It was a testament to the power of invention and imagination. The journey from James Wright's modest laboratory in the 1970s to classrooms, hospitals, homes, and spacecraft decades later demonstrated that innovation rarely follows a straight path. Sometimes, a product fails spectacularly in one context only to thrive in countless others. Silly Putty had touched millions of lives, not always visibly, but in ways that mattered. It inspired curiosity, encouraged experimentation, improved comfort and safety, and even saved lives. The lessons embedded in its journey extend beyond the material itself, highlighting the importance of persistence, creativity, and the willingness to see potential where others see failure. By the 21st century, Silly Putty was more than a toy, more than a tool. It had become a symbol of how one simple idea, dismissed at first, could ripple outward to influence countless aspects of human life. It reminded us that sometimes the most extraordinary inventions are born from the most ordinary beginnings, and that failure can be the first step on the road to transformative success. The story of Silly Putty is, at its core, a story about the unexpected power of failure. What began as a failed toy experiment in a small plastics lab in 1970 ultimately became one of the most versatile and influential inventions of the 20th century. It transformed entertainment, science, industry, medicine, and even space exploration. Its journey is a testament to the idea that failure is rarely final. It is often the beginning of something far greater. James Wright, the engineer who first developed the material, could hardly have imagined the path his creation would take. At the time, he was focused on making a simple bouncy ball, not a substance that would inspire generations of scientists, delight children, and protect lives. His frustration at the material's unpredictable behavior is something many inventors have experienced. What seemed like a dead end was actually a seed waiting for the right mind to recognize its potential. That mind belonged to Peter Hodgson, whose curiosity and vision transformed the discarded polymer into something remarkable. Hodgson saw beyond the initial failure, recognizing that the material's unique properties had applications beyond the toy market. By introducing it to hospitals for rehabilitation purposes, he unlocked its first second life. But he didn't stop there. He experimented, refined the formula, and boldly introduced it to children as a toy. In doing so, he proved that an inventive perspective can turn obstacles into opportunities. Silly Putty's subsequent journey demonstrates the unpredictable nature of innovation. Its transition from plaything to scientific curiosity, then to industrial and medical applications, illustrates that true invention is rarely linear. A product designed for one purpose can often thrive in an entirely different domain if approached with creativity and persistence. Wright's failure became Hodgson's breakthrough, and together, their contributions created a lasting legacy. The material's applications across multiple fields reveal a fundamental truth. Innovation is often about seeing possibilities where others see problems. Its elasticity and resilience made it useful in sealing, insulating, and cushioning applications. Its non-Newtonian behavior fascinated scientists and students. Its durability and flexibility saved lives in safety equipment and space missions. Its moldable nature advanced medical training and prosthetics. Each use built upon the last, showing how a single invention can evolve to meet the needs of a rapidly changing world. Beyond its practical applications, Silly Putty also carries an important cultural message. It teaches that mistakes are not the end of a journey. They are an invitation to explore, experiment, and reimagine. In a world that often values immediate success, the story of Silly Putty reminds us that patience, curiosity, and resilience are equally important. A failure in one context may be the key to success in another. Even today, Silly Putty's influence persists. Its legacy lives on in flexible materials, adaptive designs, and innovative polymers used across industries. Children continue to play with it, scientists continue to study it, and engineers continue to apply its principles in new and creative ways. Each stretch, bounce, and mold is a reminder that the boundaries of innovation are often defined by how we perceive failure. Ultimately, the story of Silly Putty is a celebration of imagination and perseverance. James Wright's initial disappointment, combined with Peter Hodgson's insight, created something far greater than either could have anticipated. From the confines of a small laboratory to classrooms, hospitals, factories, and even outer space, the invention that started as a failure became a force for exploration, creativity, and improvement. The lesson is clear. Every failed experiment has potential waiting to be discovered. Every misstep is a chance to learn, adapt, and create something extraordinary. Silly Putty reminds us that innovation is not always about perfection. It is about seeing the possibilities in what others might dismiss. And in doing so, it continues to inspire inventors, engineers, scientists, and dreamers around the world. James Wright's humble polymer, once shelved and forgotten, has become a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience. Its legacy is a testament to the idea that failure is not the opposite of success. It is often its foundation. And in the world of invention, that simple, stretchable material proves that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements arise from the most unlikely beginnings.